This is Maiku, and you are listening to the Narrow Path and the Floating Mountains podcast. This is a podcast that is dedicated to stories and tellings of my spiritual experiences and its relationship with mental health. Some of the stories I will be sharing will cover many topics such as the parallels in spirituality and mental health, ghost stories, dreams, tarot reading, mediumship, and more. I do want to provide a disclaimer that I do not have any certification in spiritual healing, mental health therapy, nor do I have an altar to practice Hmong shamanistic healing or rituals. Many of the stories I will be sharing are based purely on my personal experiences and how I have made sense of them throughout the years. So to those who are listening to this podcast, I hope that you will enjoy my stories and join me on the narrow path in the floating mountains.
She calls me day and night. I'm sorry, girl, you just don't make me feel right.
For today's episode, I talk about protection, purification, and cleansing. I wanted to use this episode to talk about protection, purification, and cleansing because I think it's one of the more important things that if you are on your spiritual journey, that this should be the first thing that you learn to do. In all of the workshops that I've attended and even with resources that I've found online, this is like one of the number one things that most spiritual practitioners will tell you to do. This is because you have to develop a stronghold on protecting your energy or just knowing how to cleanse when you feel that you're being drained, or building up like your stamina in upholding that spiritual, that protective barrier. And so I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about that. It is protection, purification, and cleansing is effective no matter the method, but it depends on you and your faith and belief in it, quote unquote faith. I say this because there's a multitude of ways that you can do protection, purification, or cleansing, and sometimes it comes in the form of prayers. It comes in the form of burning some herbs, burning some smudging herbs, or just even using whatever element that resonates with you and using that. I think that it is also one of the things that people also take for granted. I think because we are programmed to think that, let's just work through this, that we forget that sometimes we also have to take a step back and take care of ourselves. I think that, the idea of self-care manifests as protection, purification, and cleansing in the spiritual sense. And when you feel that you are safe, that you are also just in a better mindset. And so part of practicing protection, purification, and cleansing also helps you to be present and grounded, or if you need to up your vibration, being able to do that. And then of course there's a multitude of ways to do that. So I talked a little bit about why it's important. It's just one of those things that you want to do, kind of like preventative care in the healthcare system, or with your physical health. You want to do preventative. You want to get into a preventative practice. However, I don't want you to go about it where you're constantly feeling like, oh my God, I need protection for everything, or I need to purify everything or cleanse everything. There is some moderation in that practice, because sometimes too, and I've faced this. I think inevitably everyone's gonna face the worst of the worst in the things that they're exploring until they figure out okay, this now works for me in this way. I experienced that too, where I was constantly seeking oh my God, I need to cleanse, I need to get rid of all this bad juju or whatever. I went through a period of cycling through those thoughts and came to some methods or some strategies to even help me mentally and emotionally as well as spiritually. And so, why I say that you also want to practice with moderation is because then you don't want to default into thinking that everything is against you as well. So also being aware of that. I think it's okay to practice it when needed. And if you feel like you do need it, like every week or so, then, by all means, like do that. But with moderation to where if you realize like you're doing it a lot, then check yourself. Like, step back. Step back from like these other types of rituals. Kind of like when people say shopping is a form of self-care and then all of a sudden they become shopaholics. Moderation, right? Too much of something is also not good. But moving forward, my next thing that I want to talk about is how do you know when you need to purify or cleanse or protect, right? So how do you know also when like what you're doing is enough and you don't need to do it anymore? Sometimes it's, again, just figuring out that when you perform or when you perform whatever type of ritual that you are, whether it's just like, again, prayer or burning herbs, how making a mental note of how you feel afterwards, that's a key indicator of like, okay, this works now, and if things are still happening, say like if it's paranormal things that are still happening, then obviously you amp it up, or you seek someone else to help you like navigate the situation or look at it from a different perspective. Is also very refreshing. That's how I know when my whatever I'm doing, like purifying, cleansing, or protecting, is enough. And sometimes it does take a few days for you to see like, oh, okay, my energy really has been cleansed, like just giving it time to. I kind of do feel that sometimes in the spiritual world things move quickly, but also things happen. Healing happens at a slower rate when things are occurring, right? Just kind of like in the physical form, that trauma happens very quickly and healing takes a long time to do because you're unpacking a lot of things. Same thing with like spiritual experiences. On the other end of it, when you're just living your day in and out, just doing regular things, how do you know when you need to purify or cleanse or protect, right? And these are some of the things that I have discovered within my own spiritual experiences when I need to do cleansing or purifying or protection. My first thing is when I'm feeling energetically drained or I'm just really tired. I mentioned a while ago about waking up and just feeling completely drained. When you've had a full night of sleep. The next thing is then vivid and lucid dreams of things manifesting, like spiritual or paranormal things manifesting, or it's like it's showing up in your dreams, like signs and symbols are showing up in your dreams, and then the next day it's like, oh my gosh, this huge thing happened. That is not necessarily good. It's something that you obviously wish didn't happen, but it still happened anyways. And so a series of these like unfortunate events start occurring, not necessarily death, but just like things that can potentially be very harmful. That's one way to know that, okay, something is happening and I need to cleanse or I need to purify or do a whole like thing. The next thing then, as I'm talking about physical like hurt or harm, is a physical ailment. So if you find yourself developing like a sty when you haven't put on any mascara, or you haven't come across anything that might be related to that. I know that in some medical situations that stress can cause like styes or whatever, but then how does that manifest? Like where's the stress coming from? And if you can interpret it in a spiritual sense, like what is the spiritual cause of my sty, right? And the obvious answer to that is that I was thinking if I should share it or not. But the obvious answer to that is like the evil eye, right? The evil eye, and connecting it to that, and then knowing how to go about it, right? Because then once you know, it's like, oh my gosh, it's the evil eye. Resonating with like other people being jealous of you, or other people just wishing harm on you. When you know that, then you can go about doing whatever type of like protection, purification, or cleansing ritual that you need to do to like deflect that. And I will talk about like deflection and retaliation and all of that, but I just kind of want to go through this list, and it's an extensive list. So the next thing is like weird things that look like cursed items show up. For example, like locks of hair that look like they've been singed and they just appear in your house, and nobody has that type of a hair or anything like that. Weird items that just look very ritualistic, like it's been bound together, or like dead animals that you don't typically find around your house. That's a huge indicator that maybe someone has sent a curse or a hex. I don't want to say, I kind of don't feel like I have to be very careful with talking about hexes and curses, because it can look a multitude of ways. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone actually performed a ritual to send you a hex or a curse. It could just even be something as like simple as like day-to-day talk where someone's bad-mouthing you. So when things like that start happening, right, that's when you know damn well for sure that you need to purify or cleanse or protect. Other things is feelings of bad energy following you, just feeling like there's a dark shadow following you. You don't even have to see it, you just kind of feel it, right? Or like a dark cloud looming over your head, just that feeling of being bogged down. I used to associate it with like the feeling of being in a funk, like just being in a funk, just feeling like there's a lot of energetic congestion around you, and just again in connection to all the other things that I've mentioned, draining, and there's no real reason for it. That's another indication too. And then of course like paranormal things. Some paranormal things that happen are necessarily bad. Sometimes I feel that some spirits are just trying to communicate with you, but if you aren't ready for it, you can always say like you're not ready for it. And one way of doing that is like protection, purification, or cleansing. And these three things don't necessarily mean like you're casting it off to be like thrown away. Sometimes it could just manifest as like you sending them to light, or you sending them through prayer, you sending them back on their path of like healing, right? And you figure out which spirits need that, just based again on your like feeling about it. And I've had situations where I've had to do that. I've had to decide like, okay, this energy is a spirit that's just wanting my attention, or like I think I don't remember if I mentioned this, but there was a one time where I was feeling like there was something that was trying to take my son away from me spiritually, and so I had to send it to light. I just did a prayer. I'm like, this is not your child. This is my child. You have to go find your child in the light. Like, go back on your path. Like, you're not wanted here. this is not your child, he is mine. And in addition to like that prayer, I casted like protection over my son. And I just channeled like an energy of um an energy of um like I guess like a the energy of like a very healing deity or spirit or entity. Let's say for example like a lion or a tiger. That that's kind of sometimes what I do too. And in relation to that too, so if you're someone who has a child, sometimes an indication that you need to cleanse or protect or purify is when your child just gets like random like accidents. Like for me, how I realized it was when my son just kept having like just kept falling and bumping his head, and these would be like really bad accidents. And we would go through like a whole month of him not having an accident, and then all of a sudden it was like bam 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 bam, like he would have a fall or he would have like an accident where he would cry because it was hurtful, right? It was dangerous. And so if you have children, that's an indication, or if you're around children too. And then of course like, you know, with children being sensitive too, like because they're vulnerable, then you have to, and you're obviously hearing like children or even like people around you who are expressing like concern or having anxiety over things like they don't quite understand. That's also a good indication of protection or purification and cleansing that's needed. The next thing is like talking about anxiety, right? Getting angry, anxious, or feelings of self-doubt, like when this just comes out of nowhere, or you've had a really good streak of feeling really good about yourself, and all of a sudden out of the blue you're like self-doubting, or you're doubting yourself, or you're feeling anxious and you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know what's triggering it. That's a pretty good indication that you probably need to do some protection work. I think I'm gonna refer like all these three things. They all do different things, but I think as a whole, in general, I'll just refer to protection work. The next thing then is like brain fog, like just not being able to focus, just being very distracted, not feeling invested in the things that you're doing. That's another indication that you might need to do cleansing. I think protection work too also resets your energy. It's like a realignment. There are energy and spiritual healing services where you realign your chakras, or you just realign like your energetic field, put it back into shape, right? It's like if there, you know, like barricades at like a basketball game, if there's so many people working through them, moving through them, that the barricades start to shift, then someone has to come back and like realign them so that that barricade doesn't keep spreading or keep shifting towards the court, right? So it's kind of like that. Like you just want to have you don't want there to be like a super congested part in your in your energetic field, because then it can manifest as a blockage, right? So that's another thing too. Things that I found that has worked for me in establishing protection and purification practice or protection work. These are the things that I want to talk about next. And I could go on and on about protection work, but I kind of feel like these are just some of the things that I noticed early on in my spiritual journey, and things that I just figured out how to do on my own. And for some of you, maybe that's how you're discovering things. I feel like that's the best way to do it. Like just going with what resonates with you and not trying to do what somebody else is telling you to do. I think when I talk about these things, it's not like this is how you should do it and this is what you can only do. I know that I share because then it's just more information out there, more resources out there for you to like pick and choose from. And so, again, if this resonates with you, then by all means, like, go with it. These are just some of the things that I have found that has worked for me. So one of the things that if I could trace back to like how like the complete culmination of all the protection work that I've done, and I don't consciously like focus on this, it just comes intuitively, but as I'm thinking about like this episode and what to talk about it, I realize that a useful thing to take note of is choosing an element that works for you. And for me, from the very beginning, it was always fire, even though I'm an earth element. I tend to feel that even though your whatever sign that you resonate with is a specific element, that try not to stick with that. Just be open to trying out elements that actually work for you. And for me, it's fire. And of course, like with fire, through like even in the rituals that you perform for protection work, or envisioning it, using that. And for me, it's always been fire, with like smudging. I think my first experience with like protection work was smudging. And we weren't really taught how to cast protection, no matter like if we were growing up as going to church or having a Christian faith, or even in the monk traditional way. Like, we weren't really taught that. We didn't even know how to do that. Most of the time it was just our parents saying to us like, stay away. My parents didn't even really do like the whole tying a red string thing. They only did the soul calling whenever needed, and even then we really didn't use it. And so for me, I saw other resources of like, okay, how do I cleanse? Because at the time I was having a lot of spiritual and paranormal experiences, and I kept gaslighting myself, and other people kept gaslighting me about like, oh, don't worry, like there's nothing wrong with this place, like I've never had anything wrong. But just because you don't see anything happen doesn't mean like energy or spirits exist. And so I bought a bundle of white sage, and I had it with me for a long time. I didn't even know when I was gonna need to use it, but I just had it with me for a long time. And there came a day where I just like hit a brick wall, and I'm like, oh my god, I need to like cleanse. I need to cleanse like my office space, because in my old space, it used to be a daycare, and it was like a building that was built of cream city brick. So I live in Milwaukee, and we're known for the cream city brick, which is, I think it's limestone. And so I've heard that limestone is a very great conductor, or like it stores energy, spiritual and residual energy, really well. And so the building that I worked out of was made completely of this. And it was only like the first few months that I worked there. No, I already had my son, so it was like almost a year. And I was experiencing a lot of things, and I went and saged the whole upper level, because that was my domain. It was where my art classes would happen. And I was there from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. And I rarely even saw my coworkers, because their offices were on the lower level. So I never knew if I was in the building by myself, or if they were down there, and I would sometimes hear them come in, but I really never knew. And so there came a day where I was just like, oh my gosh, like I can't deal with this. I have to cleanse all this like negative energy out. Not even thinking about like the spirits or anything like that, but just cleansing the energy. And in hindsight, when I did cleanse the whole upper space, I was just kind of saying, I cleanse the space of any negative energy. You are not welcomed here. I send you to your path to be healed. And I opened all the windows and I did that. And so after I did that, there was like this really ominous like silence for the next like 3 days. And I thought that I had messed up. But it was so crazy because then once I cleansed all of that energy, because it really truly felt like the walls were caving in and I was having a tower moment, right? I was like, oh my God, everything's falling apart. Everything's coming to the surface. Like all of these things, all of these issues that I was having with my coworkers was coming up to the surface. But in hindsight, after so many years of not working there, I realized that the ominous feeling was that all of those blockages were cleared out, and now it was time for these issues to come to surface, to really put it on the table to correct them, right? Not just me, but everyone else. Like, what were these underlying issues that were being hidden and being concealed through like toxic cycles, toxicity? So all that toxic stuff got cleansed and all the issues started coming up. And so when it happened so quick. I cleansed the space, and the tension between me and my coworker came up to the surface, and then the things that they were slipping up on was coming to the surface. The thing that I was slipping up on was coming to the surface, because the new executive director, she came in trying to understand like what was going on internally, and because our positions were so divided, I struggled a lot with trying to work with this person. This person was never in, and I used to cry about, why is this happening, and why I couldn't make connections, or why were they intentionally trying to make it harder on me when I've tried everything to work with them. And so it was a lot of like, oh, I'm gonna try and get better at this, and that person just falling through with it, and I came to a point where I just gave up. And when I did start giving up was when a lot of the animosity started brewing, where I just couldn't stand him anymore, and I just didn't want to work with him. Like the way that I talked to them was just like dismissive, like nope, like I'm totally fine, like I'm gonna start doing this, because it just wasn't, I just really felt like I did not have the support, and it started brewing as animosity. And so once I cleared all that out, everything came to the surface, and oh my gosh, it made me become honest with myself. It made me become aware of accountability, and knowing how to process through that. And so shortly after I cleansed that space too, I remember someone telling me, like I was expressing this to someone, and someone who was like eavesdropping was just saying like, oh, then you didn't know what you were doing. And yeah, I didn't, but shit, it worked. Sometimes you have to have a tower moment before the healing starts to become visible, right? So I had to do, that whole time was like shadow work and whatever, and I think that was also my first taste of like doing shadow work. But that was my experience, my first time experience with cleansing and with using like this particular element. So fire had always worked for me, because then shortly after that I started envisioning like casting like a protective shield made of like fire, and that any negative energy that would come into contact with it would just disintegrate. And so yeah, it was it was like, I think through just continuing to follow through with that type of protection, like practice, spiritual protection practice, that I just knew how to do protection work based on whatever the situation was. So for me, it was fire. And I don't just specifically use fire as an element that resonates with me for protection work. I also do water with like showers and moon water, like just cleansing and blessing the place. But then with air, I think an important thing to know about air is that it doesn't necessarily have to be like physical air, like air, wind, like blowing, but words are in a way an element of air, right? So prayer could be something that works for people, and air being the element that just resonates with them. What's the other one? There's earth, grounding work, grounding and being connected to the earth to shield you or do healing work. I kind of feel like with earth, it's definitely more of healing for me rather than protection and purification. Well, rather than protection, because with purification and cleansing, I do utilize earth. And so with just like the earth absorbing all that toxicity and neutralizing it with all the minerals and the crystals in the earth's crust, to cleanse it and transform it and dissipate it. So choosing an element that works for you. How do you see these elements as part of your rituals when you are doing protection work? Just kind of like how I was talking about, like fire, things turn to ash when you burn it, or water, things washing away when you're washing your hands, dirt washing away like from your hands. That's how I used to actually envision working with water. Is when I would cleanse with water, I would think about when I wash my hands of dirt and how my hands just become clean again. And then with air, obviously like wind blowing away things, blowing away like ailments. It works hand in hand with like fire too when you're smudging, right? You're fanning the smudge. But words can be an element of air. And then, like what I just had mentioned with earth for purification or cleansing. So I talked about element. Now I'm going to go into visualizing and meditation. And I mentioned this a lot because visualizing and meditation is really important in protection work. Not necessarily meditation, because I know for some people it's they can't meditate, or that's just not their thing. I do feel like it's a ritual in itself to be able to meditate or set time aside to meditate, but a meditation can be a very empowering form of like doing protection work. But in terms of visualizing, right, some people, at first it's hard for them. It was hard for me too to tap into visual images when meditating and also doing protection work, because for me, when I did start doing protection work, I would like envision doing the protection, but then it would be dismantled because I would doubt myself and think like, oh my god, my shield got broken, it's not strong enough. And so I kept doubting myself. Like, the shield that I was envisioning kept breaking down, like it wasn't strong enough, or there was a crack. And so I kept focusing on like, nope, Michael, it's not gonna crack, you're gonna repair it, and it's gonna keep holding itself up. In addition to that too, I would just keep envisioning like negative entities penetrating and just like going through those barriers. And each time I would envision a shield and they would penetrate it, right? So I knew I had to do shadow work to work on that fear and where it came from. And once I figured that out, I realized like, oh my gosh, okay, you have to work on that, having a stronger belief and trust and faith in your visualization like process. I know a huge part for me right now that I just realized is having stamina, spiritual stamina, and believing in it. That's something that I've never had. I've always been like the tinier person in the family. I'm not the youngest, but I've always been like the smallest. Even among my friends, growing up, people just knew me as like a really tiny person, right? Tiny and short, mostly short. I'm trying to be around the bush, but a short person. And so I internalized that and grew up feeling that I wasn't physically strong enough. And so how did that manifest spiritually is then when I visualize like protection, then I keep thinking like, oh, it's not strong enough because I'm not strong enough. And so I worked a lot on that and I've gotten pretty good at it. And so visualizing, something that helps me to get better at visualizing was actually using popular culture and cinematic references or imagery from books. Oh yeah, I wanted to go back and talk about like when you're visualizing, it's not like you have to just become creative and think about something. You can also take reference from things that you've already experienced. It's almost like recalling like a movie. And there's a scene that resonates with you that, oh yeah, like they're really protected. Then you visualize that scene. And so with me, when I started doing protection work and casting like a protective shield, I would always go back to the scene in the last Harry Potter movie. Was it the last one? It was one of the second. It was the Deathly Hallows one where they cast a protective shield over Hogwarts, and so that imprinted on me, and that's what I started using as like a protective shield. Because essentially the things that come out of their wands are pure like protective energy, right? Another thing to the elements too is using like light as an element. And so that's how I started casting my protective shields, is light. And so reinforcing that would then be fire, where things would disintegrate, but the light shield would be protecting whatever it is that it's encasing. And so I use a lot of references. That's how it's helped me. And whatever resonates with you, or if you're a book reader, if there is something that sticks out to you, then use it as well. Maybe it's it is an invisible shield made of like nanobites, right? Or like nano like androids or cyborgs, right? And that protects you, right? So if you're thinking about like an invisibility cloak, like how can you cast that invisible like cloak or shield? And maybe you use Harry Potter with his invisibility like cloak. So highly recommend using visual references from popular culture. I don't think there's a shame in that because it's going to resonate with you. And as long as it's working for you, then that's all that matters. Even in meditation, right? If you start seeing things like characters from movies pop up and you're like, you're seeing this scene again, use that. But some people would argue that you'd have to go into meditation with a clear mind. And for some people, for the life of them, they just can't like clear their mind because they just have so much going on. And I have moments like that too. And there's something called, it's got a name for it. I think in Buddhism, Buddhist spirituality, it's called monkey brain. Where your mind is just everywhere. It can never stay in one place, and you're just constantly like thinking that you can't calm it to be able to be present with what you're experiencing. So you can practice this in meditation, visualizing, or if you're doing a chore or random thing, you can practice visualizing too. Visualizing like, okay, if I had a protective shield, what would it be? What is that element? And just thinking about, what has worked for you. Like, could it be words? Like when you say things and all of a sudden it just happens. How can you use that in your protection work? The next thing then is to plan out your process and strategize your ritual and how it will work. Kind of like what I was saying, when you start doing your protection work, how is this fire going to work? How is this shield that's made of blue fire, how is it going to work in cleansing or protecting you from the energy that you don't want it, right? If you want to disintegrate it, then that's fine. If you want to send it to light, then that's fine, think about how that's going to work. And then when you're prepared for it, where are you going to do this and how are you going to do it? Thinking about each step too. I think when I started doing the smudging and I had my own little words and how to word them, that when I felt that it worked, I went into my journal and I started like just writing it down. So I did that, and then I also had I also was really into doing candle work where I would write down things that need to be healed or I need to send to light, things that I needed to work on internally to let go of, and in a way like do cleansing or purifying. I would write things down and then I would have a little phrase or a little paragraph, and then I would burn it and say it. So I have that because that worked out for me. I haven't really had to use that, but I have it down just in case I need to go back and use it. But at this point in my life, in my journey, I haven't really gone back to do any of my older protection work. Because I'm constantly changing it up, just because I do what resonates with me. I do what I feel is intuitively working for me. And then sometimes I would just do something quick. I don't use a whole hour to do protection work. I just say, okay, you're not for me, go on your path. And I think it's become easier for me just because I have worked on my stamina. I have worked on my self-doubt, that things just work a little bit faster for me. And no, it doesn't mean that I'm completely cleared of these things that happen to me. I think even when you cleanse, you still need to do more cleansing. It's not that you do it one time and you're completely protected. Sometimes, things wither. Energy is very ethereal. It's not permanent. it's constantly moving. And so sometimes once it's done doing its job, it'll just like disintegrate with the time or the elements. Just like, when trees are done bearing fruit and they begin to age, or it's their roots are just beginning to like age or rot, depending on the tree. I can't say all trees like go like this, but I'm trying to use the metaphor of like the rotting tree, where then it for the tree that's like dying, it falls over, becomes a log, a rotting log, and other things can like use its wood to thrive or to survive, right? It serves its purpose, and still afterwards it serves its purpose, but it's no longer like bearing fruit, right? Its purpose of like bearing fruit, it's no longer doing that. And so once it's done doing that, then other things can grow around it, or I hope I'm using a good example, but that's just kind of what came to my mind at the moment. But energy is very ethereal. It's very fluid, and just like us, emotions are never permanent. We're always flowing through emotions. You know, spirits are always moving. They don't tend to stick to one particular thing, unless like there's an attachment. But neutral energy, right? It's always flowing. And so you don't do it just one time. It's actually something that you keep practicing, and you practice when you need it. And if there's one thing that works for you all the time, then keep doing it. If you feel that you're someone who is more intuitive and picking and choosing whatever it is that you want to do, then do that. It doesn't have to be the same. Maybe there's a different type of work for each circumstance or situation, but as long as it works for you. I realized that I didn't really go into like the difference between what I've identified as the difference between protection, purification, and cleansing. And so with protection, it's essentially like you are performing something to like a ritual or a plan to protect yourself from energy that maybe you haven't experienced yet, or if you've already done the purification and cleansing, then you cast a protection to kind of like encapsulate your process. So protection work is essentially that's what it is, protecting yourself from energy that you don't need. And then the next thing is purification. It's similar to cleansing, but with purification, I do feel that you can work with some protection work. Purification is incorporated into the process, but purification itself is like, how do you reset yourself? How do you reset yourself, but then put some good energy into it to sit in the place of that void that was taken up by this negative energy, right? So say for example, you were feeling angry, but in order to pass through that emotion, you have to take out that anger and then replace it with something. So that's where purification comes from. It's like you take out that anger and then you put in some other type of emotion, like joy, right? Joy or compassion, right? In a way, you're cleansing it of, or you're taking out the anger and you're putting in the compassion. That's how I see like purification anyways, is that there's an exchange. Cleansing then is the complete like cleansing of the things that, so say like you are content in what you're doing, but you're realizing that you're being drained from it, but it's not affecting how you feel about yourself, but you're just feeling energetically like drained, then that's when you need to do cleansing. You just cleanse yourself. You're like, this is extra stuff that I don't need, and I need to cleanse it. You know, you're completely fine, you're happy, but you're just like tired. That's an indication of needing to do cleansing. And then obviously following cleansing would be protection. With these three, though, there's not one that is better than the other. They all can work hand in hand together. So it could be some things where like you cast protection first, and then you do the cleansing, and then you do the purification. Or you just do the cleansing and then you do the protection. So it doesn't matter what order you do it. It all comes down to like how it resonates with you based on the situation that you're dealing with. So with the idea of like anger, right? So if you are coming home and you're feeling drained and you're irate or you're irritated at everything because of the things that you do with at work, the spiritual explanation of that would be then you are taking on other people's emotions, and then they're filling up this void. They're basically overfilling your cup of emotions where you were happy. Now it's like anger keeps filling it up, where that happiness is starting to like spill out to the point of where anger is the only thing that is now filling your cup. So what then you do is and I'm speaking from just like an example. So then what you do is you can cast like a protective shield, right? Because then you don't want anything else coming to you. Then you do the cleansing. So you're cleansing yourself of all this extra stuff that is in your auric field. Cleanse it all away, right? Take it out, wash it away, and then you assess like what needs to be done, and you purify that. You purify it. You take that cup of water that is filled with like angry water, and you sift it through like a Brita, a spiritual Brita, and you take out all the negative juju, and then as it's filtering, that water becomes like rejuvenated and it becomes pure again, to where you can where it's just feelings and emotions of like happiness are kind of like restored, right? If that makes sense. So when you're thinking about purifying, you're thinking about Brita. You're not really taking out the water to you're not taking out the water, the substance. You're just clearing that water, or you're purifying that water, so all like dirty bits like anger gets filtered out, and you're left with like this pure state of joy and happiness and just being, right? Purifying, so connecting it to like, as we're talking about references, purifying kind of like what the Brita filter does, and then cleansing is like taking that shower, right? Taking that shower and just washing that dirt away from your hands. You're doing the same with your energetic field. And then like the protection is like you know, how do you protect your body then, right? So we protect our body with clothes, we protect our skin with like moisturizer or sunblock, right? You know, protect yourself through like music, sounds. I also forgot to mention that. So some ways that you can also protect yourself or cleanse or purify is through sound. There are sound sound meditations that help realign or clear your chakras, either all of them or just a specific area that is being congested with like energy that is just creating blockages. And so you can do sound cleansing as well. That's also an element of air. I would say it's an element of air, but it also depends on whatever sound, what the source is. But you can do sound healing, cleansing, purifying as well. And that's one way to also cast protection, right? When you're in your cubicle and you're working in an office and you just keep taking on people's things, you just like plug your ears. And if your work is like computer desk work, then you plug your ears with like sound healing and you just focus on that, right? That's one thing that I learned that I would do too, is I would use music. I would listen to my MP3 player on the city bus to just cast that protective thing around me, but also like being aware, right? So those are some things that you can do. That's an example of, you know, the difference between the three in protection work, but how they work hand in hand too. Again, not one is better than the other. It's very circumstantial and depends on what you feel intuitively. So I did want to go in some more on this. I actually recorded this episode a few weeks ago, but I deleted it, and I was trying to upload it for today, but I couldn't find it because I realized I deleted it, and I just took it as, you know what, just roll with the punches, just re-record it, because maybe you can come at this from a more refreshed point of view. There's always a newer perspective on things, right? And so I did that, and I actually feel really happy with the things that I'm able to share with you all. Of course, there will be more episodes in the future that will cover these topics, but take this as like a really like basic 101 on protection, purifying, and cleansing. So with that said, thank you so much for tuning in for this episode. Please tune into the next episode, where I talk about guides, spirit guides, and your spiritual team. So, thank you again, and I will see you in the next episode. And that concludes this episode of The Narrow Path in the Floating Mountains. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tune in for the next one coming out soon.
She calls me day and night. I'm sorry, girl.